do you really have to explain to someone who's done 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school that knife in penis hurts? Like, is this not something they can understand? I think they can, but understanding that would mean changing everything about their profession and the power structures that they are complicit in.
Hmm. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. So the other day I was talking to my friend Ashley, and she said, you are so lucky to have 10 years of wisdom and thousands and millennia, hundreds of thousands of years of wisdom energetically passed down to you. And she even called me an old soul. And I said, "What do you mean exactly by that?" And she said, "The way that you have been so confident in your pregnancy, and that no matter what each day brings, you find the joy in it. You find a way to be grateful that you are experiencing aches in your back, or you find gratitude in the heartburn, or you find humor in the burps that slip out mid-sentence." And I laughed and said, "Yeah, I think that's just my personality." And she said, "No, it's not. It is that you are so in tune with your body. You're so confident in the things that you know, that you have literally been put on this earth. You have been tasked with guiding other women and not only finding their voice, but truly taking control of their pregnancy and birth." Now, of course, if you know me, you can imagine that I started to tear up at this moment. And I just felt a great sense of, gratitude. I felt really grateful that I get to hold this space for so many of you. And I can tell you that I have learned hundreds, maybe thousands of lessons over the last 10 years. I have supported more than 2,000 families in bringing their baby into this world. I have seen hundreds of different types of scenarios. I have interacted with hundreds of providers. I have seen straightforward births. I have seen babies that are born so fast, we literally didn't even get a chance to leave the bedroom and get in the car. And this was a planned hospital birth. I've seen that multiple times. I've seen babies born on the side of the road because they were born so fast. I've seen multiple 6-day labors. I have seen low-risk labors that came from low-risk pregnancies turn emergent in a split second. I have seen the highest of high-risk pregnancies go absolutely smashingly. I'm talking like so smooth that everybody was in awe because when she was in labor, everything was well. I've seen necessary interventions. I've seen unnecessary interventions. I have seen unassisted births. I have seen home births. I have seen birth center births. I have seen hospital births. I have seen surgical births. I've seen elective inductions, medically necessary inductions, chosen C-sections, medically necessary C-sections, unmedicated birth, epidural birth, births that use nitrous oxide but neither unmedicated nor epidural. I've seen nurses catch babies, OBs catch babies, dads catch babies, midwives catch babies. I've caught 2 babies when one was on the side of the road and one was the baby that was born in the bedroom before we could even get to the car. I can tell you that I am so confident in birth because of all the things that I have seen. And in addition to that, I do feel this deep sense of connection to this ancestral wisdom that, I don't know, it just feels like it's part of me. In addition to all of that, don't forget I do have a master's degree in human development and family studies. And so not only do I have the skill to read research, but in true nerd fashion, I actually genuinely enjoy it. There's nothing more that I enjoy. Well, maybe some things like chocolate and being at the beach, but very few things do I enjoy more than going through a scientific article, and I want to know about the methodology. I want to know how many people participated. I want to see what your p-value is. I want to see what your confidence interval is. I love to know how you actually put your study together and then conducted it, and who were the people that when you got to the end of your study, you had to take them out of your study because, well, they didn't really meet the criteria of the study at the end of the day. I want to know the tests that you run. I want to know how you got to your conclusions, and I want to see how you present those conclusions, and is it honest and transparent? Now, I know this is not everyone's thing. I know not everybody likes research. I know that not all articles are easily read. I know that not everybody feels this confidence and joy or that deep ancestral wisdom. So here's what I've done for you. Well, I put it in an app. I put it all in the Birth Lounge app, and I hit all of those pieces. I share all of those births that I have attended over the last 10 years. All the knowledge that I've gained from that, it's all yours. The data and the science and the evidence-based, backed decisions that you can make in labor, also found in the Birth Lounge. I'm telling you what those articles say, and then I'm linking it for you too so that you can go and read it should you desire. And I'm also looping in that ancestral wisdom. I want you to know, what did birth used to be like, and how come we've gotten so far from that now it's over medicalized, and every single person that walks through the door gets Pitocin. Everyone signs up for an unnecessary 39-week induction. Why are our C-section rates skyrocketed, and why do so many women have birth trauma? Plus, how do you avoid that for yourself? If there's one thing that I've gotten really, really, really good at over the last decade, it is helping you avoid birth trauma so that when you leave your labor experience, you feel empowered, you feel so happy and satisfied with the way that it turned out, and you are proud of yourself. You're not crying, you're not traumatized, you're not spiraling, you're not stuck thinking, what in the world did I just go through? Instead, you think things like, wow, I did that. Oh my God, look at this baby that I grew and I birthed. Holy cow, am I a superwoman? If you're craving deep education that is not only going to prepare you for an amazing birth experience, absent of trauma, where you get to be the decision maker, but you're also craving a community and you're craving the data to help you make those decisions. Plus, you want to learn how to be this confident in your birth and in your pregnancy and in your parenthood too. Download the Birth Lounge app. Head to your respective app stores, whether you're Android or iPhone, and type in The Birth Lounge, and it will pop right up, and you can get started literally right now. I hang out in the app. I'm always updating it with new information, and it's way better than scrolling social media that's going to numb out your brain. Instead, scroll and empower yourself to have a better birth. Download the Birth Lounge app today, and I'll see you in there. Bye. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. All right, before we dive into today's episode, I want to kind of set the tone because this is another one of those conversations. This is one of those topics where people feel really, really strongly one way or the other. It's emotional, it's cultural, it's medical, it's personal. And for a lot of families, it is something that they probably didn't even realize was a decision until they were being asked to make it. Today, we're talking about circumcision. And more specifically, this episode is about the growing movement that questions the necessity of circumcision entirely. Now, you guys know how I like to approach every conversation on this podcast. I'm not here to tell you what to choose, and I'm not here to influence you one way or the other. I'm here to make sure that you actually understand that you have a choice, that you know that there are two sides to the decision. I want you to hear the anti and the pro. I want you to hear, well, the pros and the cons, the benefits and the risk. I want you to hear the data behind the decision so that you can make whatever choice feels best for you and your baby. Because too often in maternity care, things are presented as routine and standard and, well, this is just what we've always done, without any sort of real conversation or informed consent or evidence-based discussion. And so I wanted to have on two guests, one that was pro-circumcision and one that was anti-circumcision, so that you could truly be able to think about your decision and how the long-term implications may impact your family and your baby. And circumcision is obviously one of the topics where people think now, but also long term. For decades in the US, it's been normalized to the point where many parents never even hear the full story. They never even get the breakdown of what is the point of the foreskin? Why are little boys born with foreskin? And then why is it removed? What are the true risks of keeping it? Are there any? And what are the true risks of removing it? Are there any for that? And what does the evidence really say about the benefits of keeping it or the benefits of removing it? So today's episode and the next episode are going to be breaking that down. We're going to be talking about informed consent when it comes to circumcision. And it's not just about anatomy, it's about autonomy too, even when that autonomy belongs to someone who cannot speak yet. I'm joined today by Brendon Marotta, who has spent years researching and advocating around this topic and who takes this very clear stance against routine infant circumcision, framing it as a violation of bodily autonomy and, in his words, a form of genital mutilation, a cutting that deserves much more scrutiny than it currently gets. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the actual biological function of the foreskin and what happens when it's removed, the immediate risk like bleeding, infection, surgical complications, and how often those happen. And then we're also going to be talking about the long-term outcomes like sensitivity, sexual function, and psychological impact on males who have been circumcised. Brendon is also going to share about the commonly cited benefits like reduced UTI and HIV risk and whether those claims actually hold up when you look at the data. He's also going to dive into ethical concerns around consent when this procedure is being done on a newborn who obviously can't consent. Also, what role does culture, religion, and financial incentives play in this super common procedure done in the US? And then what do other countries do? Are we seeing circumcision rates be the same as here in the US? If they're different, how come? And then finally, what parents can do if they're feeling the pressure from their providers and their family members to make a decision to get circumcised, yet they feel like that is not the right choice for them or it's not something that they are fully comfortable with. When I asked you guys what you wanted to hear in this episode, which by the way was suggested by you guys, so many people wanted to talk about the more controversial aspects, like what happens to the foreskin after it's removed, and how is the newborn pain managed, or is it managed at all? And what kind of impact can circumcision have on early parent bonding and maybe even infant feeding? I'm not gonna lie. This episode is going to challenge what you've always believed. It definitely brought up some things for me. I was super uncomfortable in some of this conversation because it just brought things to surface that I had never considered before. And considering I'm about to have my own baby, and we don't know whether Saji is a boy or a girl, but if they happen to be a boy, This will clearly be a decision that my husband and I will have to make. Now, some of you have already made this decision, and you know what? Fair warning, this episode may make you question the decision that you've already made. And I don't want you to think that that's a bad thing, because being an informed parent doesn't mean that you always get everything right. It's about making the decisions in that moment with the information that you have and the awareness that you have at that time versus just blindly trusting. So if you made that decision based on the information that you had at that time, and you have since changed your mind, or maybe this episode will be the catalyst that changes your mind, I don't want you to walk away with guilt. You must stand in your decision and remember that you did the best that you could with the information that you had at that time, and it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. So whether you already feel confident in your choice and you're currently pregnant, or you're trying to decide if circumcision is right for you and your family, this episode is going to give you a perspective that you probably have never heard in full. And at the end of the day, you're allowed to ask questions, and that is what I'm bringing to you. I'm asking those hard questions. We're bringing you the answers, and you are allowed to not only take your time, but think fully through this decision. And then at the end of the day, the decision is yours. You are allowed to make the decision that is aligned with your values, not just hospital policy or our cultural default here in the US. So without further ado, Brendon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you on. You have been a long time, like, gold star guest that I've been wanting to have on this show. And I have to be honest, this is a very intimidating conversation for me because it is such a hot topic. People get really riled up about this. And, it's not my personality to steer away from those. I'm the leader of a lot of conversations that get people riled up. But for some reason, as a woman, I don't feel like a leader in this space. I don't feel equipped to lead this conversation, but we're going to give it a go. And I'm excited to have you here. And I think a really good starting off point for us would be to understand the history of circumcision before we go down the route of maybe why it's not appropriate for everybody.
So, when it comes to the history of circumcision, there's really two sort of places you could start. There is the religious cultural history, and then there is the medical history. And the medical history actually only goes back maybe 300 years ago, in the Victorian era. And it's very different from the religious history. And I think it's important when you talk about this to start with the misconceptions. So the biggest is that circumcision has only been a norm in America in the last, 100 years, maybe. I mean, really, the hospital system that came out of the 1950s was when it sort of took off. But for most of human history, in most cultures, the norm has been to leave the body intact, which, of course, is sort of obvious because when a child comes out, parents have a lot of different feelings. They're overwhelmed with the sense of a new life that they've brought into the world, and they're connecting to this child, and they're thinking about all the responsibilities they have. And it would be strange if in that moment someone thought, you know what we should do? Let's go, cut a part of this child off. That's actually a really aberrant thought.
Yeah.
And not the norm. So the medical history of circumcision began during the Victorian era, and it began as a cure for masturbation. The Victorians had this claim that masturbation was the cause of a great many social and moral ills. They thought it caused all sorts of diseases. When you hear people talk about sort of strange myths about, like, oh, masturbation will cause hairy palms or something like that, those come from the Victorian era, and they were proposed seriously as if this was a great, moral and social ill. And when I had always, heard that history previously, it was presented as that basically the Victorians were just crazy and they had these very repressive views of sexuality. And since then, I've heard some alternative viewpoints, one of which is that this was a way for the medical system and people in society to extend their power. So previously, parents had power over their children. The parents are the people who take care of the child. They're the ones who get to make decisions for children. And what this did is it said you have to act as surveillance. They were telling parents essentially to act as surveillance for the medical system to make sure their children didn't engage in this, horrible habit. And when it occurred, they had to call the doctor because, of course, they as a parent weren't, according to the system, capable of solving their own problems. And so it was a sort of forged crisis to allow the medical system to have a lot more power over children and children's bodies. And one of the theories I've heard is that the doctors at the time knew this was not that, this is normal. Like all human beings touch themselves. It's like this is even, primates and all of humans' closest animal relatives do the same thing. So what they were doing was using this as an excuse to get access to children's bodies and get power over them in society. And I don't know if that's the case. I think that it makes a lot more sense than many other theories. And in recent years, I've found it much more plausible because I've seen the medical system do similar things in modern society. So if you were to write a history of the past 10 years, you would say, wow, these Americans were really crazy. They thought that if you wore a piece of cloth over your mouth from the front of the restaurant to the chair where you sat down and then immediately took it off, that you wouldn't get COVID. That was like a thing that they must have believed. And of course, I think most people knew that that was kind of ridiculous. That actually wouldn't stop, disease prevention. But if you look at the forms of power that the various interventions against COVID created, that makes a lot more sense. So a lot of the things that we look at now in history and sort of take at face value, I think make more sense from a power perspective. If you start looking at, okay, what power dynamics did this create? Who did this elevate in society? And so if there's a massive crisis that only the medical profession can solve, oh, and it's regarding human sexuality, one of the most important parts of human society. And now it's a medical problem that they have power over, not something the church would have power over, not something that governments and kings would have power over. This is a medical problem, therefore only the medical profession can have power over it. It makes a lot more sense. And so there was a sort of craze, if you will, around masturbation and the idea that we needed to do everything to stop this, immense social ill in Victorian society. And that was how circumcision began as a medical practice, because they thought, well, if we remove the most sensitive part of a man's body, then, and also the mobile skin, the skin that he would be sliding over himself while doing that, then we can prevent this, as they saw, this horrible social ill. And as time progressed, like any medical intervention, especially one that is irreversible, there's a real danger in admitting fault. Because the moment someone in society admits that they've done something wrong, there's consequences. And so what occurs over the history of circumcision is that they invent various new reasons for it and say, oh, well, this must be the reason we do it. And now, even when I sit down and do an interview, people say, well, why do we do this practice? The assumption behind the question is there must be a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I say the reason is power and power over children's bodies, that's not a very satisfying reason. And it certainly doesn't make the people who are practicing this look very good. But I think that is the real reason. And so over time, there's various new reasons that are invented. At one point, it was claimed to prevent various diseases and STDs, and those claims have basically been dropped and disproven. And they flipped over time. So at one point, it's, well, this will reduce sexual pleasure, and that's, according to the Victorians, a good thing. And then later it becomes, oh, well, it doesn't have any impact of that at all. Ignore the thing we previously said. Just kidding. Now that society has changed and sexual pleasure is seen as a good thing, obviously they sort of have to change their narrative. And I think that there is something that happens when the American hospital system takes off, which is that it becomes a norm then. And it becomes a norm for two reasons. One is that it's something they can charge for and make money on. And so the hospital system is basically a sales funnel, and they want to upsell you as much as possible. And I'm sure you've had people talk about various other upsells on this podcast that the hospital system engages in that are just that. They're upsells. They're something they can increase their profit with. And circumcision, at the time when it begins, it's not a consent. Now they'll give the narrative. This is another narrative that has changed. They'll say, oh, it's a parental choice. The parents choose this. And actually, when it started, you would get a blanket consent form when you came into the hospital that said they get to do whatever they want. And it was just done sometimes without the parents' consent. And that was the norm up until the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a court case where a family that had wanted to have a religious circumcision sued and said, wait a minute, we don't get to practice what we wanted to do because you already did that. And it was actually that changed the hospital system.
Mm.
So the whole history of it's very strange. And it doesn't make any sense on the surface explanation because the explanations contradict each other and change. They'll say it does reduce sexual sensation, then later they say it doesn't. They'll say this is just something we do, and then later they say, oh, it was your choice. But it does make sense if you think about it in terms of power, because even when they contradict each other or say something that isn't true, whatever they're saying does seem to increase the power of the medical system, and it does seem to increase the amount of access and power they have over children's bodies. So I think the history can be understood as a sort of slow encroachment of the medical system trying to get power over children's bodies and over parents in the family. Because if you as a parent have the frame, I don't need any help, I can take care of my own child, there's nothing for them to sell you on. Any business has to have a problem or a thing that they're trying to address that they claim they can help you with. And if you have a totally healthy child, there's no problem for them to solve. So inventing a problem, saying that the natural body is a problem, is a way to start to create that power and that business. And that's why I also separate a bit from the religious history, because you can make some arguments that there are some parallels in the religious history, but it is a different discourse. Although I will say that when someone involved in that system or actually even someone involved in a religion or culture that practices circumcision, they'll sometimes draw from the medical arguments because they understand that simply saying, well, it's my religion or this invisible being told me to cut off part of this child's body is an insane thing to say. And so they end up drawing from the other discourse because we live in a modern secular society where that alone is not an acceptable argument. But the other thing you'll see is that sometimes when someone is defending the medical practice, they'll say, well, a lot of people, this is their religion or their culture, even though in those religions and cultures, medical circumcision has no value. It doesn't fulfill any of the requirements of those religions or cultures. It's a completely separate thing. It would be like saying, oh, well, some people drink wine during communion as an excuse for alcoholism. Like it doesn't, it is such a separate practice that doesn't have any of the same symbolic value or claims. But in both cases, both arguments increase the power of each of those separate systems. So I think if you start looking at the motivations of power and of what people are defending, what purpose the arguments serve, it makes a lot more sense. And many of the justifications given are rationalizations after the fact. They're things that people say in order to defend those systems. But if you start looking at the power structures involved, it's a very different story. So the short answer of the history is that it began as a quote unquote cure for masturbation, and they've been trying to come up with a reason better than that ever since.
It reminds me of when women used to be persecuted for masturbation and orgasm, and it was labeled as hysteria, and they were claimed to be crazy, put in psych asylums. No one in this community, Brendon, is surprised or opposed to hearing the idea that it is based on control. As someone who's in women's health and as a woman, and having primarily female listeners, we are totally aware of the control that the system is always trying to exert over us.
By the way, the hysteria thing began during the same time period. So,
I'm not surprised. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes so much sense. So they were really trying to just basically cut everyone's sexual pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, female circumcision, female genital cutting was proposed as a solution at the same time by many of the same people and did not continue the same way that male circumcision did. And I've heard some people suggest that the reason one continued and the other didn't was because one is a practice in Judaism, and there are a lot of Jewish people in the medical system. And the other is a practice common to Africa and brown women. And there's a lot of cultural imperialism that, well, the practices that white people engage in are somehow better, according to their thinking, than the practices of Black Africans. And
Mm.
I think that the cultural difference there was probably a factor in the reason that one continued and the other didn't. And the other is our ideas about gender and which bodies are to be protected and, soft and sacred, and which are expected to endure pain for the good of the tribe. So, one of the sayings I've heard is that we make women sex objects, but we make men success objects.
Mm.
And men are expected to sacrifice their well being and their physical safety through things like work and through things like war for the good of the larger community. And so a man saying, well, actually, I don't want to endure pain for all of you. That sounds awful. It's like, well, why aren't you? Like, why don't you be a man and actually endure this? And of course, that adult standard then impacts people's perceptions of male children. And I think it's a very different scenario if an adult man chooses something like that or makes a conscious choice to do something that sacrifices their personal safety for those that they care about versus it being imposed on a child. One is heroic because it's a choice, and the other is just pain.
Okay, now in terms of pain, there are so many people who believe that these children are getting pain relief during this procedure. And I think you and I know that they don't. They get sugar water, right? Which is not a pain relief. Am I correct? Your face tells me like maybe that's not right. Is that right or no?
Oh no, I'm thinking because it's actually worse.
Well, enlighten us.
So up until the late 80s, it was believed that children did not feel pain or could not remember the pain. Those are the two claims that the medical system made.
Got it.
And I again, I think it's because, it's very obvious to anyone that children feel. And I've heard two theories as to why they might have believed otherwise. One is that mothers in the hospital system used to give birth under full anesthesia, which would have gone into the child and would have been much more significant in the child than it would be in the adult.
Okay.
So they might have come out not feeling because they were under full anesthesia, which is not safe for a child and has all sorts of other problems. The other is, again, a power explanation. That information came through observation, not medical studies. And so if they acknowledge that your eyes and ears are capable of knowing obvious things that contradict the quote unquote science, that's a threat to the power system. And so there's a sort of epistemic injustice that occurs in the medical system where only things published in medical journals are seen as evidence based. And anything not in those journals is anecdote. Your Google search doesn't replace my medical degree. And how dare you think that you can understand this information? But of course, regular people don't have access to those journals. It takes a lot of money to do the kind of research that gets published in those journals. And those journals are controlled by the medical system. And so the people who decide what goes in are a very limited group with financial incentives that don't represent the majority of society or even the majority of information available to society. And I think that acknowledging the harm they were causing might have also threatened the knowledge power system, that they had specialized knowledge that the rest of the world didn't. And that's the reason you have to pay them. Although I would say now with the internet and especially with AI that's going to be challenged in the next couple of years.
Hmm.
So at the time, like I said, they made the claim, oh, infants don't feel pain, and there were two major studies that just obliterated that. One, I think the best was the Tatteo pain study, which showed that not only do infants feel pain, but they remember it later and show signs of PTSD based on traumatic experiences. So these studies were specifically done on circumcision, and they were looking at children who were being vaccinated later and seeing what their pain response was during vaccination. And what they found is one group of children had a very dramatic reaction to the pain of vaccination. So they're having a needle go in, they're feeling some pain. And some children are reacting much more dramatically than the amount of pain that a single needle would be. And what they found is that this group of children was the children who were circumcised. And what the researchers took from this and the way they explained it was that the children had had a very painful experience during circumcision. And then they had a painful experience during vaccination. And this triggered the PTSD that they had around circumcision. So they were not just reacting to the pain in that moment, they were also reacting to the memory and beliefs that they had developed as a result of circumcision early in life. And that study has established that's the one that, not just for this particular pain, but other forms of pain that the medical system causes. But the difficulty is you cannot put a infant under full anesthesia. It's just not safe. And so sometimes, in some cases, they will do local anesthesia, but that still involves an injection, which is, of course, the same thing that the later pain study was looking at around vaccination. So there's still pain around that. And it's multiple injections to the base of the penis. Again, very sensitive, very painful. And you have to wait a full 5 minutes for that anesthesia to take effect. And most physicians don't. It's not like they're there with a stopwatch, so they inject it and then they start. And the infant has no way of giving feedback as opposed, I mean, I can see your reaction. This is part of the absurdity of it all of, okay, well, we have to, do you really have to explain to someone who's done 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school that knife in penis hurts? Like, is this not something they can understand? I think they can, but understanding that would mean changing everything about their profession and the power structures that they are complicit in.
Hmm.
So it's a case where you're trying to get someone to understand something that their salary depends on them not understanding.
Mm.
And very often talking to someone about this subject who's in the medical system, you're not really talking to someone who's trying to have a back and forth conversation with you or trying seriously to understand. Because if they did understand, it would mean that they would experience guilt. They would experience guilt and sadness over what they've been complicit in, not to mention all the financial consequences. So that's a short answer on the question of pain. Now, the reason I was thinking earlier was that I have now learned that one of the things that they sometimes give children for pain relief afterward, because if you're healing from surgery, it's painful for weeks afterward, is Tylenol. And I don't know if you know this, but Tylenol was in the news recently
It has been, yeah.
as something that might be a factor in autism.
Mm-hmm.
And there have also been studies that have said that circumcision and autism are linked. And many of the studies that look at Tylenol in young children are actually studies of circumcision, because the reason that people would give that to very young infants is because they are experiencing pain. For most parents, the only other time they would give their children that kind of medication is if they're very sick or if they're teething later in life. And teething doesn't start until several months after they're born.
Or
So,
vaccinations, right? So after
or
a
vaccination,
vaccine.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. So the studies that they're talking about now regarding Tylenol as potentially being a factor in autism are have these co-founding factors around circumcision and vaccines that might indicate that those are a factor in autism, but it's inconclusive at this point. I think there's other evidence on at least circumcision that there's other reasons that you would want, the entire body you're born with. But it's one of those things where, okay, well, if someone's causing pain in that way, well, they'll say, oh no, now we're giving them pain relief, and then you do some studies on the pain relief they're giving, and there's a whole new issue. So I don't think there's a good way to do surgery on an infant or to cut parts of people's bodies off. There's not really a good way to do that. Whereas, if you just leave them the way that they're born, none of these are an issue.
I mean, especially on someone's genitals, right? Like the most vulnerable
Yes.
and most sensitive places on our body. You can't,
Yeah.
it's very hard to conceptualize that we would be able to numb a baby's penis at any point well
Yeah.
enough to make incisions into it.
The absurdity of the idea of circumcision itself begets other absurdities.
Mm,
So now they're trying to solve a problem of like, how does someone do genital surgery on an infant? Why are you doing that in the first place? Right.
mm, yeah.
But that absurdity also comes from viewing the body and birth itself the way that the medical system does, as if it's somehow unnatural or a medical emergency. And that itself also, is viewed the way it is because of the beliefs around sexuality or the profit system of the current medical system. I mean, all of these different, it's almost an intersectionality of bad ideas and different problems that are so easily avoidable. You're talking to someone right now who has done two home births, and the second one was a free birth because our midwife didn't leave the house fast enough. So you can you can do all of this on your own. And actually, after free birthing, there's an insane confidence I got as a result of doing that. Oh, I can do anything now. Like this is something that I thought we would need help with, and actually, maybe I don't need help. We'll probably still have someone on call, and if we have another child, hopefully, God willing. But it's so simple to do things outside the system,
Hmm.
and I actually think it's much easier than it is to reform the system. Because if you
Hmm.
start thinking about one of the discussions I've had with other activists and people who are involved on this issue is I think that many of them are going about it the hard way in the sense that they want to change just this one little thing in the medical system. If we could just get them to stop offering this one procedure, it would be fine. And actually, that is part of a sales funnel of a whole bunch of bad ideas. Whereas when I talk to parents who are involved in home birth and natural birth, their reaction is, well, of course we wouldn't, because for them, doing something like that would require work. They would have to leave the house, they'd have to call someone, they have to make an appointment, they have to pay money out of pocket. It's a hassle, especially during the first weeks of birth. And for what? For something that is going to be gory and cause, they're gonna have to heal from and has all these complications and is completely unnecessary. The default option for those parents is, well, we'll just leave them intact because we did everything else naturally. Why don't we do this naturally too? It aligns with their other values. Whereas the medical system has a lot of values that aren't aligned to human well-being and the needs of parents and the needs of children. And so if you try to change that one thing, you're sort of suddenly pulling on a spider web of other problems and issues that needs fixing. And it might be easier to solve the bigger problem than the smaller problem.
By just stepping out of the system. I didn't realize until this conversation how much overlap there was between the control of women's bodies and now the control over children's bodies. I'm really having like a kind of a mind blown
Yeah.
moment here. Okay, something that I've heard you talk about on other podcasts that I thought was very interesting. And as a female, I could never understand it. It never would have crossed my mind. I don't have a penis, right? I've never been circumcised. I don't have that lived experience. But you said that there's long-term trauma, and you've mentioned it again here that these children kind of have these PTSD symptoms. And the podcast I was listening to, you were talking about sexual trauma from children that did not have obvious sexual trauma. So we're not talking about men who were sexually assaulted or who were, had any sort of sexual trauma in their childhood, but they grow up to say things like, I miss the piece of my penis that has been taken away. I wish that I was intact. They had trauma from the non consensual procedures that were done to them, and they don't even have any, like true memory of it. But it goes back to the body always keeps the score. The body does remember. Talk to us about
Yes.
that because I remember exactly where I was. I was driving. I remember the weather. I remember what I was wearing. I mean, that moment imprinted on me when I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy to think about this.
Well, I'm happy that something I said created a realization for someone. I mean, the Tattoo pain studies are pretty conclusive that there is a change in behavior. The difficulty with pre-verbal memories is they're not something that you can talk about like a linear narrative memory from the other day. So if I ask you what you did yesterday, you can give me a story and, take me through day by day or moment by moment what happened. These are what you might call somatic memories. They're felt senses in the body, and that's how most early life, pre-verbal, infant, even womb memories are, is that they are a felt sense in the body. And there are various healing methodologies and things that people do that they claim can access those or can process them emotionally in some way. Whenever I talk about this, I notice that some people sort of have a defensive reaction of like, well, I don't have any of that. It doesn't affect me. But this isn't something that the conscious mind could answer.
Hmm.
It's not at the conscious level. And what I also tell people is that you don't have to like, you don't have to go looking for them. Everyone I know who has done any kind of healing work or psychological work that dealt with those things didn't go looking for it either. They had a problem in their life that they couldn't solve any other way. And they said, all right, everything I know consciously says that I shouldn't feel this way or this shouldn't be a problem, but it is. And they were just trying things to try to solve that problem and eventually ran across, early life healing or somatic therapy or something like that. And that's what worked for them. Now, I suspect there's a lot of people who say, I don't have anything like that. And they totally do have something like that. They just have never consciously explored their own feelings and thoughts in some way.
Yeah.
And what I notice too when someone says that is there's a sort of defensiveness against even exploring the question. So their shoulders tense up. They kind of move into like a defensive fighting position. And it's a defense against trying against those feelings or against exploring the possibility of those feelings. And what I would say is if someone had nothing around that, there'd just be curiosity. If you met someone and they said, I have this memory of something that happened to me when I was a baby or when I was in the womb, you'd be like, that sounds really interesting. Like, why?
Sure.
Even if the you thought, this they're probably, this is probably not real, or I don't know if this is true, there'd still at least be curiosity. And I find that's my attitude towards most things that I think, this is a little crazy. But sure, I love a good story. Let's hear what they have to say, you know?
Humor me.
Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it is totally off the wall and it's crazy. And 1 time out of 10, I learned something new. So I think that if you have an attitude of curiosity and exploration, not just this aspect of the issue, but most of the issues that I'm sure you talk about in your podcast are a lot easier to explore. But I think that the defensiveness comes from two fears. One of them is that if you feel that feeling, or if you explore that, that's just who you're going to be now. That the feeling is endless and limitless, and that, you'll become one of those people who's just like constantly wallowing in self-pity in the past. And it's actually the opposite with emotions. If you feel something fully, it dissipates and it's gone.
Hmm.
And if someone is angry about something and you say, all right, I want you to have maximum anger, I want you to like scream and break things, you can't sustain that for more than a certain, a few minutes. At full energy, at full volume, you get tired. So what happens is the feeling dissipates once you explore it. And it's actually the defensiveness that keeps it there indefinitely because it's wanting to be let go. It's waiting to be expressed. It's waiting and it's still there and it's going to be there until it is. So the defenses take a lot more psychological energy and energy in general than just letting it out. And I think that the other sort of defensiveness has to do with, especially men, with power and this idea that acknowledging a vulnerability or an experience of powerlessness would detract from that. Because, like I mentioned earlier, men have a very strong need for power and for feeling like they are successful and accomplished and have status. And I think you could almost compare it to a woman trying to explore the like if she had to like psychologically explore that somehow she wasn't desirable or lovable. It's like
Mm-hmm.
because for men, our lovability, the ability for someone else to love us often is tied to our status. And men who are very powerful have a very easy time getting validation, and men who aren't have a harder time. So I think there's a fear there that acknowledging this will change their status or power in some way. And what I have found is that if you are willing to look at reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, but as it is, and see it fully and feel it fully and go from there, there is so much more power making decisions from reality than from delusion or denial.
Mm.
So there might be a period of pain where you're feeling the feeling or you're exploring whatever powerlessness you might have experienced in the past. And once that's cleared, there's more power there in the future because you have power over it, over the past experience, over the previous trauma. So that's what I would say. And I would also say for men, there is a very strong desire to be a protector and to ensure that your family is safe. And this might be necessary to explore so that your children are safe and they don't experience the same patterns.
Mm.
So I've explored this very thoroughly over the course of films and books and podcasts and all sorts of different things. And there's a 0% chance that anything I would even allow those people near my family,
Mm.
and that's because I'm aware of it. I think that lack of awareness is often the place where someone wouldn't have the same experience, I'll say. So for men, I think there's a duty and a need to know essentially what predators might be out there for your children and to ensure that they don't get near them. And this is one where you should be aware.
Okay, so you just opened up a question in my brain of are there any correlations out there to circumcision and then things like men being more aggressive or wanting to engage in more abusive sexual acts or being a pedophile or being a rapist or needing harder, more stimulation? Do we have any data around any of that? What do we know about the long-term impacts?
So there's some, but there's also a lot of co-founding factors. Or there's things that make it difficult to measure.
Okay.
Um, Probably the best study for that would be the Kinsey study of human sexuality that did show that circumcised men pursue more varied sexual acts.
Mm-hmm.
And
Some risky, right? Is what that
yes, and
studies.
and those were one of the theories I've heard on that is that because there's less physical sensation in the body, those men are trying to find more physical sensation through other ways. They're essentially
Yep.
compensating for what, on an unconscious level, they know they should be feeling. The other difficulty with studying this is that since circumcision is practiced by certain cultures and not others, any study of associations between circumcision rates and things like crime is also going to be a study of those cultures comparatively. So circumcised men are the majority of, criminal offenders, for example, in Nordic countries, but Nordic countries don't practice circumcision, and the people who do are the Muslim immigrants. And so those, factors are like, is this a study of people from Muslim cultures or immigrants or people who've experienced circumcision? The difficulty is that all of those you could make a case for in the data. And I will say that one of the theories I have heard is if you look at the cultures that practice circumcision, it's Israel and Jewish culture, it's America, and it's Muslim societies. And you can look at how those cultures treat human sexuality and what level of peace they're experiencing in the world.
Hmm.
But again, it's difficult because if you look at cultures that don't practice this, they have their own unique forms of trauma and ways that their culture and their parenting and the things they do to children have shaped them, and not all of them are good. So if I don't think there's a culture in the world you could point at that I wouldn't be able to find something in the way that they've treated children that is causing issues for them as a culture. But because it is cultural like that, you can sort of look at a broad society and make a sort of psychohistory analysis and say, okay, well, maybe part of the reason this culture, this people, this part of the world is the way that it is because of the unique experiences they've all shared early in childhood.
Hmm.
But again, once you get into that, it's not something you can easily do a randomized controlled trial for. And
Sure.
so people who are invested in that will be very skeptical of any claims made about the link between circumcision and later life behaviors. But the research we have does indicate that people remember early life experiences and they change their behavior based on those. And so it follows from that logically that an entire culture that's had a shared or similar early life experience is going to behave differently as a group.
Mm-hmm.
I am a fan of the sort of psychohistory perspective that you can look at history through the lens of early childhood and see how, based on how children were treated, how that society was turning out and what experiences they had, based on that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, like I said, it's not something you can study in the traditional randomized control trial method yet.
Now, what do we know about circumcision and things like erectile dysfunction? Any connection there?
Uh, the two largest markets for ED meds are America and Israel. So that's what we know.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. If you've been following me online, then you know that I have spent the last several years battling, and I say that very intentionally, battling trying to find a good, clean deodorant. Several years ago, I learned about the harmful chemicals that were put in a lot of our skincare products, and one of the worst offenders is actually our deodorant. Well, since your deodorant goes on every single day, and for some people, multiple times a day, and for some people, directly after you shower, and it's put on right in your underarms, which is such a center point to your lymphatic system, I knew that that's where I wanted to start when I started my journey of getting rid of harmful products in my life and my home and replacing them with cleaner products. Now, little naive me set out and thought, well, I'll just go buy clean deodorant. And boy, was I shocked when I walked down the aisle and couldn't find a clean deodorant. There didn't seem to be a single product that met all of the things on my checklist. I was looking for truly clean ingredients, not a whitewashed label. I was truly looking for a product that didn't have fragrance or parfum in it. I am really, really adamant that fragrances do not come into my home in any form. And so, if I was going to go with a clean deodorant, I was really, really strict that it was truly clean. Over the years, I have tried so many brands. Matter of fact, it's kind of become this joke in all of my friend groups because when they find a quote unquote clean ingredient deodorant, they will send it to me and say, have you tried this or did it not pass the HeHe test? And, a lot of them really don't. For so long, I struggled with irritation in my underarms. I mean, at one point, you guys, the skin of my underarms was literally peeling off, and I had these blisters underneath my skin, basically, and they were so painful. I mean, there have been so many events that I would have to be smiling and bearing through the pain because my underarms were on fire. It was absolutely horrible. There were several times where I had to sit with ice packs or warm washcloths underneath my arms just to find comfort and relief from what these clean deodorants, so-called clean deodorants, had done to my skin. I know it may sound a little dramatic, but I've cried a number of tears over this because it is something that's really important to me to put clean ingredient products on my body, yet the very one that I wanted so desperately to find, I couldn't find anything that was healthy for my body. It either didn't work and left me stinky, or it didn't work because it caused skin irritation, or it simply just wasn't a clean ingredient deodorant. Now, I did this for so long that I finally gave in and I bought a traditional deodorant. Yeah, I did. I went to CVS. I bought Secret, I cried over it, and I started to use it because I didn't know what else to do. It was actually horrible. It caused me so much mental and emotional anguish because I just wanted to have a clean deodorant and I couldn't find one, and I felt so frustrated. And while I am certainly the personality that is like, well, if I can't find it, then I'll just make it myself. First of all, I know nothing about making skincare products. And second of all, I'm already building something. I did not have the time or the wherewithal to take on making a skincare product. I even tried a salt rock underneath my arms. I even once tried rubbing lemon on my underarms. I mean, when I say I did it all, I literally tried everything to find a clean alternative to deodorant, and nothing worked. So when I learned about Zebra, I was honestly skeptical. I was like, not another one of these clean deodorant brands. I'm probably going to invest all this money into a tube of deodorant and it's just going to leave me with irritated skin or stinky armpits or more tears because it didn't live up to my expectations. But on the contrary, boy, was I so happy. You guys, I really cannot even tell you how much Zebra deodorant changed my life. And I gotta be honest, I absolutely love the name Zebra because it is so indicative of their black and white ingredients. They are a non-toxic, freedom-loving brand who answers to no one and creates a product that is transparent that you can truly trust. The quest to find clean ingredients and wholesome products in a nation that has subpar standards for our people has been so hard. It's really been a real trial of love for me. If it didn't matter so much to me, I would have given up years ago. But you know me, I'm not giving up and I will not be beat. So I'm so excited that I finally came across Zebra and I finally found a brand and a product that not only do I love and it works, but I totally trust this company. To get your hands on the deodorant that I love and use every single day and trust with my body to keep me from being a smelly cat, head to yayzebra.com. That's YAYzebra.com and use code HeHe, HeHe, to save now. That's yayzebra.com using the code HeHe to save 10% on your order right now. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the foreskin itself. Is this a sellable product? Because I think there's a lot of rhetoric online that says it's put into our skincare, it's worth a lot of money. Earlier this week, I spoke with a pro circumcision professional, and he shared that in his practice, they simply dispose of it or they allow the parents to take it home. Where does this rhetoric come from? And is he not the norm? Are we kind of seeing
Is he a
hospitals
family
sell it?
practice doctor or is he
He
in the hospital system?
so he has a private clinic and he only does circumcision actually. It's the only thing that he does.
So it comes from the fact that there are stem cells in all infant body parts, including the early life foreskin. It is used in certain products. It's used in certain skincare and beauty products. It's used in
Oh.
various medical tissue things. I mean, we know this because you can go online and search like foreskin fibroblasts and buy it online. It's not a secret.
What?
Um, it is something that you can just find. And I had someone on my podcast who did a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests around it, around hospitals. So they do sell it. I don't know on any particular person's clinic or what their practice is. I do know the major hospitals do. And I do know that there are some who've said we don't. And then they got a Freedom of Information Act request and they said, just kidding.
You do.
Here's it in black and white. So
Hmm.
it is sold. I mean, from a business perspective, obviously from an ethical, moral perspective, it's abhorrent. But from a business perspective, I don't know why they wouldn't, because they can make money on both sides. They can charge the parents and then they can sell the product. So, I mean, we also know that, abortion clinics do the same thing with infant organs. They sell those. Again, stem cells. Stem cells are very valuable.
Mm.
It, it's one of those things where, people hear that and they're sort of shocked and offended. But it seems to me that the harvesting of the product, if you will, is the big moral issue. And once the larger moral question has, not been answered well or correctly, all these other ones sort of fall like dominoes of, well, if we allow that, we might as well, while we're here, while this is happening.
It just opens up the question of the motive, right? Like, if we can't find a real good medical reason to circumcise these children, is the motive ROI and profit from selling the foreskin and then that sales process that you had kind of talked about? There's documented cases of hospitals keeping placentas, and it is hypothesized by some people that the hospitals will then sell the placentas for the exact same reason, the stem cells. And it just, there's a very sinister storyline here that I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are really interested in finding out the truth about.
I've had a lot of people ask me about the motive. And what I think now is that it's the wrong question to ask
Mm-hmm.
because a human being can have a motive. A system does not have a motive the same way. It has incentives. So a hospital or the medical system as a whole cannot have a individual motive. Every person in that system or who's complicit in that system might have a motive, but theirs might be very benign. Theirs might be, I want to make money, or I'm doing my job, or someone told me to do this. The system, however, can have incentives. And I think the incentive of any system is to increase its power. So the medical system, the way that it's set up, has a structural issue in that it makes money from solving problems. And if it wants to increase its power and profit, it has to create more problems to solve. The worst thing for the medical system would be if everyone was perfectly healthy.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be out of business.
Yep.
If you can invent problems and get good at that as a skill, by the way, or medicalize things that were not previously a medical problem, like mental health. Feelings are not a medical problem, but if we can frame them as one, now there's this whole new sphere of human society and human consciousness that they would have power over, and that only the experts would have power over. Because once it's a medical problem, only medical experts can solve it. that's the incentive structure of the system, is to sort of continually find new ways to expand its power, because anytime that happens, people make a lot of money and they have a lot more prestige and power. And by the way, I don't think money is a form of power, but it's only one form of power. And I think it's more useful to think about it in terms of power than money, because power also includes status and prestige, it includes
Hmm.
control, political power. There's all sorts of things like that that aren't direct profit, but are certainly a benefit for the people in that system. So when you talk about motive, it's probably better to look at incentive,
Hmm.
or whose power, who benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, I want to talk about the benefit of the foreskin and not necessarily the benefit of keeping it, but what's the role of the foreskin for someone who is maybe they have objectives of like, well, why would we even keep it? What is the role of the foreskin and why are we born with it that way?
It is the most nerve dense and sensitive part of a man's body. It creates lubrication and gliding during intercourse. All of the openings of the body have a lot of nerve endings, and that's an opening of the body when it's covered. So the most nerve endings are actually in the ridge band of the foreskin. It protects the head of the penis. So when there isn't a covering, it becomes dried out and keratinized. And actually, someone who's intact still has that part of the body as gliding and mucosal. It's has a natural lubrication. So if someone has to use any kind of lubricant during sex, that's the result of their body not having the natural lubricant, which would be lost because of circumcision. So it has a function during sexuality, and then in infancy, it's actually fused to the head of the penis, kind of like how your fingernail is attached to your finger, and it becomes mobile usually around adolescence. So it's the design of the human body is that once someone becomes sexually active or is capable of that, then it's mobile and it has, sensation. And actually, I will add, for women there is some sensation there too, because that part of the body is moving inside a woman. Allows the man to have shorter strokes and stay closer to her. If a woman has ever used, sorry if I'm getting too graphic, but something like a ridged or a ribbed condom or something like that, is trying to simulate the sensation of the foreskin.
Huh.
So there's all sorts of things in sexuality like that it's important for. And these are just, by the way, the ones that we know, because there is a lot of incentive for the medical system to study this. There's less studies of it, but these are the ones that I have heard and that people who've looked at this issue are aware of. There might be more that we don't know.
There probably is, right? Like anything in medicine, we have so much that's still uncovered. I look at it kind of like the depth of our oceans or our solar system is there's just so much that we don't know yet. And the science is always changing. So what do you say, keeping along the lines of objections, what do you say to people who say, well, it's for cleanliness and for little boys that are not circumcised, they're at a higher risk for infections, urinary tract infections, STDs, STIs. What do we need to know about that data?
When someone makes these claims, I really would like it if someone like that had a long form discussion with me where
Hmm.
they were willing to answer questions. Because usually they'll say, like, it's clear, and they just sort of run off and scamper away, because they don't, the purpose of those lines is not to have a discussion. Because if I start asking follow-up questions, okay, what do you mean by cleanliness? How are you defining that? Is that part of the body naturally dirty in your view? Do you think something about, human sexuality or genitals is dirty? Cleaner how? Like, what is that? How you clean things is by cutting them off of the body. Is like, where in your values does cleanliness exist? I would just have some, but these questions are not things that they've actually seriously thought about. The purpose of a line like that is it's what's known as a thought terminating cliche.
Hmm.
The purpose of it is to end thinking, not explore thinking deeper. So once they say that, they don't need to examine it any further. They don't need to look at all the data that I've, been sharing here. They don't need to learn anything about it. They don't need to think about it. They don't need to look at their own feelings. Thoughts terminated. We can move on. I don't have to think about it too much, right? And if you look at the justifications, many of them are thought terminating cliches that don't make sense upon any sort of inquiry. So even the cleaner one, that sort of began again during the Victorian era, where they did think that human sexuality was somehow dirty or unclean in some way. The claims about, I mean, the claims about STDs, you could go through those studies one by one. I will say that the largest, most prevalent of those claims now is around HIV. And in the studies that made that claim, I interviewed one of the researchers involved. The group that was circumcised got free health counseling, and as a result of that, used condoms at a higher rate. So there are actually studies of condom use. It turns out that using condoms produces STDs. Who would have thought?
Duh.
Um, but if you get in the data, like one group used condoms at a higher rate, and that's actually what they're studying. And every study like that has something that you could get into with the data. But people who say that aren't reading, PubMed studies about
Mm,
STD transmission in sub-Saharan Africa. Like they didn't get that idea from actually researching the science. They got it from a headline that allowed them not to think about something. And I don't think that most of those people are really concerned about the STD transmission rates of their newborn.
mm,
If you also think about it as this is an intervention of, even if you weren't to see all the flaws in those studies, okay, well, we're talking about newborns here. Why would they need STD prevention in any form?
mm.
It gets into a really weird question of like, well, why do you think a newborn would need STD prevention? Like, it seems a little creepy to be concerned about. I don't know. But again, the moment you start going under the layers of those questions, there's a lot of weird, unconscious, unexamined things that I don't think even the people making those claims want to explore.
Hmm.
So they're thought terminating cliches. And that's why I say if someone wanted to think deeply around those and use that as a jumping off point to explore their values around parenting, around sexuality, what they feel about the human body, I'd love to have that discussion. Every time I've tried to arrange a discussion or a debate with someone who has a differing perspective, they have mysteriously dropped out or stopped answering my emails or something because I think that would mean exploring those questions, and the incentives aren't there for deep thinking. The incentives are actually there to prevent deep thinking and deep exploration of what these systems are doing and what the incentives are.
For
So
conformity.
yeah, if you were curious in like going really deep in the science there, I could. I've interviewed those researchers. I have researched it myself, but I don't think that most people's parenting values are really defined by those questions.
Yeah.
And I would say if someone says that, like, are those your parenting values? Because at some point your child will ask you about this. They'll hear something, it'll come up somehow. And the answer you give them about a permanent life altering decision you made for them is going to communicate something about your parenting values. And they're either going to want to share your values or they're not. They're going to have a feeling about it one way or the other. And that's a decision. Again, I think these decisions are often sort of framed in like a rational scientific way, but parenting decisions occur in the context of relationship. There's a human being that you have a connection with, and they're going to have feelings about every decision that you make for them because everyone has, strong feelings about their parents. Like people spend much of their lives unraveling the feelings they have about their parents. But that's where these decisions that you make are going to exist in the emotional and psychological life of this future person. They're not going to exist in a textbook or a, you know, medical journal or something like that. So is this a good communication of your values as a parent and as a person? Is this who you stand for in the world? Or is this what you stand for in the world? And is this who you want your children to believe you are as a person?
Hmm.
Those are the questions I would look at.
Very philosophical for a lot of parents, and not everybody has the wherewithal or the self introspection to kind of sit with those things and to ask themselves those questions.
I mean, you can't, at the same time, though, it's, you can use this as a jumping off point to explore deeply. And also, the surface explanation for many people is fine in the sense that, like, my values are that people should be nice to my kids and not take knives to them. Like that's a pretty easy moral, ethical. There's some questions I do have to think deeply about, but that one actually, the sort of surface feeling I have there, I'm pretty comfortable with.
You know what comes up for me when you say this, and this isn't something I've ever thought about, is in terms of, I've thought about circumcision, but in terms of what does it communicate to my child about my parenting and my beliefs, is that I have built an entire platform. It is very much who I am. I am very upfront about my beliefs in autonomy. And then if I were to have a little boy and I cut pieces of his penis off and he then watched me live this life based on autonomy, and one day he came to me and said, "Why did you do this to me?" How would I explain that there was no honor for his own autonomy other
Yeah.
than at this point societal pressure, because I am not Jewish, so I don't have the religious component to consider. So it would simply be that societal pressure, which leads me into my next question about a common objection that I hear from men all the time, which is, I'm circumcised, so I want my son to look like me. What do you have to say to that? I have my own thoughts and I'll share them after yours, but what do you have to say about that?
He will. I mean, obviously he will, right? He just won't look like what a doctor did to you.
Hmm.
I think that there's a couple things there. The fear that men have about their son not looking like them is a very deep psychological thing of fear of not being the father.
Okay.
So when someone says, "Oh, he should look like you," the thing that they're really attacking with men is, "Oh, you don't want to be a cuck, do you? You don't want to be not the dad. You don't want to raise another man's kid," which are like, no, obviously not. By the way, in my family, people have frequently joked to me that my wife just copy pasted me and just just took like the Photoshop duplicate function and made a mini me because they look so much like me. She gets upset about it sometimes, but I'm going to repeat it on this podcast and
I mean, she's like,
annoy
dang it,
her
I
even more.
carried those kids.
Hmm. Um, but I mean, like they will look like you, of course. So I think that again, if you look at those sort of statements not as a logical argument or objection, but as like trying to push a psychological button to get a certain amount of power over someone, I would reframe it as like, do you have power over your kids or do they?
Hmm.
Who gets to put their mark on your kid? Is they going to have, are they going to look like what you chose for them? Or are they going to look like what, someone else decided to carve into them? If you want ownership of your kids, this is the choice to make, is to keep them looking like you and literally looking like your DNA. Your DNA told the woman's body to produce this body inside her. That's you.
Hmm.
So I would also say to that, I think there's a psychological thing there too of that they might have to look at what happened to them. And the language around circumcision is identity language. So if you have any other surgery, you wouldn't say I am shoulder surgery or like I am knee surgery. That would you'd say I had knee surgery. Well, this is also just it's surgery. It's a cutting, but people don't say I was circumcised or circumcision is something that happened to me. They make it an identity the same way you would say like I am a particular race or I am a particular gender or sexuality identity. And so it sort of gets incorporated into a whole series of other identities that it doesn't belong in.
Hmm.
You actually were intact. You could say, I am or I was intact. That is who you were. And then someone did something to you. So this isn't an identity, but it gets put in with identity language. And the moment that happens, well, there's a sort of psychological, I got to protect my identity. And again, it hits the same point of like, if someone was to tell you there's something wrong about your race or your gender and all of the anger and, rightfully so, that might come as a result of that, even though it's not one of those things, it's just something that happened to you. And part of reclaiming your identity is to view it that way, is to say like, oh, wait, this is, You don't get to tell me who I am, like just
Hmm.
because something happened to me. So I think the language there is a little deceptive at times.
Yeah. I have never considered that. I mean, I just think there's so many perspectives that as a woman, as someone who does not have a penis, I've never been circumcised. I think there are so many things that I can't even conceptualize in my brain to consider or to
You
think
could.
about.
I mean, I would push back on that.
Okay.
There's a book I really like called Rape of Innocence by a woman named Patricia Robinette.
Okay.
So at one point in America, female circumcision was practiced much less than male circumcision,
Mm.
but it was done as a medical practice. It was covered by Blue Cross and Blue Shield in the 1970s.
Wow.
And this woman had that happen to her, and she wrote a book about it.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about in it that many of the attitudes that circumcised men have, she experienced too. She had this sort of anger her whole life that she didn't know where it came from because no one told her, and she wasn't looking at other women's bodies. So she didn't find out until later in life. Very interesting story. And she had this anger throughout her life that she didn't know where it came from. She was having, increasingly varied sexual experiences, trying to get some pleasure she thought she should have, but didn't. And she said when she found out what happened to her, her reaction wasn't anger initially. It was actually just, oh, like now it makes sense. All these things I've been experiencing. So I don't know that I think some of the factors are framed as gendered, but aren't
Mm.
because children experience trauma the same way, and um, many of these things are universal. It's the cultured and gendered aspects that might require a leap of empathy or a little bit of imagination of, okay, if people treated me this way, how would I feel? But some of them don't. I mean, I don't know. I think a knife hurts everyone.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a huge mental leap required there. So I understand the impulse to, or the desire for your husband or for women wanting the man in their life to make decisions that are in the domain that they know best.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, you can figure it out. It's not that complex. Knives hurt. It seems to feel good on that body part for most men. They would prefer it feel good than feel pain. It's not that complex.
I also do believe so heavily in a mother's intuition. And when you ask moms, they will be very upfront with you that they don't believe in circumcision and that
Yeah.
something innately tells them that it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes so much cultural conditioning and, actually, I think the medical system might be over $1 trillion. Might be, I was about to say
Wow.
billion, but I think it's actually over a trillion. I'd have to look it up. I remember 2 trillion off the top of my head, but it might even be more than that. Who knows? But it takes so much to convince people anything otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's actually the psychological defenses and the conditioning that's the expensive thing.
Mm.
If none of that existed and someone came up to you and proposed this really novel idea that they had for your child, uh, most people I think would pepper spray that person, and be like, get away from me.
Yeah. Run away. Okay, there's this popular meme that is being circulated online right now about that, more than 50% of men in America or kids in America are not circumcised now. Is that true? And are we starting to see a wave? Do you see a future where circumcision is the abnormal versus the normal? And this is derived from another common objection that I hear from so many dads is, well, I don't want my son to be bullied in the locker room because his penis looks different than all of his classmates. And I mean, I never saw bullying in the girls' locker rooms, but we didn't
That's a
really spend
boomer
too
thing.
much
Boomers
time.
are so weird.
Yeah, you
I
think?
don't, yeah. There's no one in my generation. Gosh, I'm approaching 40s now. No one in
I
my
mean, I'm
generation has
35. Yeah.
experienced that. That's a very boomer meme. Um, so to answer the first part of your question, the rates are changing. It's hard to get good data on them, but all the data that we have indicates it's going down.
Okay.
So that's the good news. Anecdotally, I do see a lot of conscious parents, people on social media saying that they have kept their kids intact or they are keeping their kids intact. And there is a very strong conscious choice being made by many people to change that. I don't know how much it's going down, but I also do a strong-willed minority that is let's say intolerant in their beliefs is what has changed most societies around most issues. So I think it will change. I don't want to make any particular predictions around that. I have some ideas about how it could change, and I might need to save them for later because that's a little
Okay.
bit beyond the scope of this interview. I also, regarding the locker room meme, that's another one where if you start, it's another thought terminating cliche. Just imagine this scenario as a parent. How would you feel as a parent if your child came to you and said that other people at school were looking at their genitals and body shaming them for it?
Mm-hmm.
How would you react in that situation? Would you say, well, it's time for plastic surgery because we gotta get their approval? Or would you call the school and maybe call a lawyer too while you're at it? I think if I learned that someone was behaving that way towards my child, let me put it this way. If I was to hire a criminal defense attorney, they'd tell me to stop talking right now and
Mm.
not say what I would do. But I don't think I would react with thinking that my child had done anything other than what they should. So there's another thing there where there's people have that sort of thought terminating cliche, probably because of an experience that some boomer had in the 1970s when the rates were 95% and it became a cultural meme and it got passed down and no one ever thought about it again and thought, wait a second, this is actually a situation where I, as a parent, should make myself everyone else's problem
Mm.
and set down some boundaries about how we're going to treat my child.
And their body.
Yeah. Uh, my attitude, if I learned that that was occurring, would be to bring a lawsuit against the school. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
would do in that situation. So, yeah, I don't know. Leave your kids intact, and if anyone has a problem with that, then they have a problem with you. That's what I would
Mm.
say. And again, I think that the culture is changing around that, where if someone were to behave that way now, and again, it's like such a culture, like the locker room. I don't even know if that's something that still exists the way that it did for boomers. It's such a boomers projecting their cultural experience onto the next generation. I think our kids are going to have the problem of like people doing weird stuff with AI when they're in school and
Yeah.
augmented reality, and they're just going to be in a completely different world. And all of the one of the in general, actually, I'll say one in general, one of the challenges that people have as parents and should think about is that they are not raising their children for the world now. They're
Mm.
raising their children for the world 20 years from now.
Mm.
How much has the world changed now versus 20 years ago? And how much do you think it's going to change? Let's see, it's 2025 now. What does the world look like in 2045? Do you think that in 2045, the locker room is what your children are going to be concerned with?
Mm.
You just have to take a different perspective on, the world that you're in and the world that you're preparing them for. There's so many things I could say around what I think the world will be in the future that it's good to prepare your kids for. But again, that's a little beyond the scope of this interview.
And yeah, we definitely don't have time for that because I could rabbit hole down that for sure. I do all the
Mhm.
time. I'm always like, oh my God, what do we think this is going to be like? And oh my God, do we think this is going to be a problem? And this is definitely going to be a problem. We should think about it now for sure. Okay. I think my last question is revolving around the idea that if we leave our kids intact and then that child grows up to think that or to make the decision, not think, but they did consensually make the decision that they want to be circumcised, what kind of things do those parents need to consider, or does that now adult child need to consider with doing a circumcision later in life? Is there anything to think about other than what you would typically think about in surgery?
The question I would ask in that situation is, why would you want that? So let me ask, are you describing a scenario where there's some, life-saving a medical emergency, or is this something that they think that they need?
Yeah, I'm just
Here's
envisioning a
what
child waking up one day and being like, I think I want to be circumcised. I've been researching it. I want to
that is not how anyone has ever made any decision in their
mm,
entire life. I would be curious how that desire was created
came
and
about.
what values and beliefs influence that decision. Because I don't think that occurs in a vacuum.
Mm,
If your child said that they wanted to, I don't know if I want to step on this issue, but I'm going to anyway. If they said that they wanted to have gender transition surgery,
okay,
that is actually, I mean, that would also involve genital surgery. I think most parents would have some curiosity as to how that decision came about.
for sure.
If they said that they wanted to get a tattoo, that's another, less controversial, life-altering decision. I think they would have some decision there, like some thought process. There's
Okay,
probably other people in their life who have tattoos, and there's probably some meaning or aesthetic that they associate with those. If they said, because we're talking about, children who are going to be alive in 2045, if they said they wanted to genetically change their eye color to purple so that
mm,
they glowed in the dark, why would you want that? That's a pretty big change. That's a permanent change. But actually, in that case, it's a genetic change. It might get passed on to their kids, your grandkids. Why do you want that? In all of those cases, there are cultural factors that are influencing that decision. That decision didn't come about in a void. They made that decision in a culture that viewed that decision a certain way, that gave them certain beliefs and social constructs around that decision. In another culture, they wouldn't consider any of that. If they were in let's say Saudi Arabia, definitely not safe to do gender transition surgery there. I don't think tattoos are permitted the same way. We'll see what the religious leaders there rule on genetic engineering 20 years from now. But again, I think that there would be a different cultural influence there. So if someone says, "Oh, I just came to this decision on my own," in a culture that normalizes circumcision, in a medical system that has a profit incentive for it and an incentive to push it, in a peer group where it's normalized, in a place where there's social shame, I don't believe that decision that was made in a void, so to speak.
mm,
And so I would be very curious about that. Many years ago, I actually had a woman ask me that question of that she had a son who she kept intact and was considering it. And I gave an answer at the time that I think was a little more, evidence based. They should probably consider these things. And later I learned that this son had a girlfriend, his first girlfriend, who was really pressuring him around it. And she just thought that it would be better. She thought, she had adopted all the sort of cultural ideas about that part of the body being gross and this is what's normal. And I also noticed that his mom was a really strong-willed woman. And there's a virtue to that, but I think it came out in her parenting where she was always telling him what to do. And so then he got into a relationship with a woman where the woman was always telling him what to do, and she was telling him to do this. And I thought, that's why he wants to make that decision. He's a teenager, it's his first love, right? Big deal. And that has been the pattern that he developed in his relationship with his mom.
hmm,
And so I thought, oh, well, that's where this is coming from. And what actually, if I was to give that young man advice, I would say you need to develop a sense of self such that you don't just do what the woman in your life tells you to do. And you tell her no sometimes. You have some clear boundaries. But that's a way deeper conversation than like, well, here's some research you should look at. And it requires knowing the person and why they're making a decision.
yeah,
And I think a lot of these discussions are framed as intellectual, but they're actually relational.
mm,
And so he's not making that decision because
for
of some
himself.
study he read. Yeah, it's coming from something else.
Yeah,
This is also true, by the way, of of couples, of husbands and wives making the decision. What is the relationship there? If one parent wants it and one doesn't, or one has strong feelings one way and one has strong feelings the other way, what are the values and beliefs and things going on there? I know that when I met my wife, before we were even engaged, we had a lot of discussions about our values. And now, when we're making a decision, we're usually on the same page. Every now and then she's got some piece of information that I didn't have, or I've got some piece of information she didn't have. And once we explain it to the other, we're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But the values are aligned. And I think that if you are someone who hasn't met the person you're going to have kids with yet, it's good to have not just this issue, but like all of the parenting values issues discussions ahead of time. Because if you're aligned on that, then a lot of the issues sort of resolve themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's simpler later. So if you're someone who values natural parenting or peaceful parenting or a particular relationship or connection with your kids, then this is pretty easy to figure out, like a lot of parenting issues are. Whereas if you're with someone who doesn't share your values, that's a more challenging situation.
Or if you don't know your values, right? I think so many people
Mm,
outsource their power to society and say, well, this is just
yeah.
what we do. This is just normal. This is a huge one where people say, well, we just circumcise in America. And it's like, but you don't have to if it doesn't really fall within your values. And then you say, well, what are your values? And they say, I don't know. I've never really thought about it.
Outsourcing values is a value choice.
Mm,
There's that quote, you have the power to choose, but no power to escape the necessity of choice. So even giving someone else your power is a choice. So I would say in those cases that they're making a choice to do what the larger social structures around them want. And there's probably an underlying reason for that choice: acceptance, ease, comfort. Then you got to get curious about, okay, well, what do you value about comfort or safety? Or like, which of those is it? Maybe it's that you want to be a good person and everyone around you, good is defined or seen as good by others, right? And being actually good might sometimes involve stepping on people's toes or saying something they don't want to hear or making a different choice. But then you just got to get curious about those values because that is a choice.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Brennan, this has been amazing. This has been such a good and deep, thought-provoking conversation. I really, really appreciate you. Before we wrap up and I tell people where they can find you, tell us about your documentary, American Circumcision.
So I made a feature-length documentary called American Circumcision. You can find it on circumcisionmovie.com. And I think right now it's on all the places that you would buy a movie, but I also think it might still be on Tubi right now if you want to watch it for free with ads. It is a feature-length documentary that explores this issue and interviews all of the major experts on it and is designed to take someone from knowing absolutely nothing about the issue to being an expert in an hour and a half with a lot of story and excitement and production value along the way.
I love it so much. Thank you so, so much for being here. You guys, if you're still with us, thanks for hanging out. I know that there were some things that we probably both said that made you clutch your pearls and go, oh, come on, guys. But I really, you know the name of the game around this community. It's let's have the hard conversations. Let's lean into that discomfort. Let's talk about the things that nobody else wants to talk about because I know that you need this information in order to make the best decision for your family. And I know that everyone out there, you just want to make the best decision for your children. I truly do believe that. And I know that these hot button topics are the ones where you struggle probably the most to get information because nobody wants to have these conversations. Or you go to your healthcare provider and they aren't able to give you the full range of information and they aren't able to hold space for this deep philosophical thinking or to think about the future of long term impacts. They just talk about right now, the here and now. And so I just wanted to thank you all for showing up. Thank you, Brendon, for your wisdom and your transparency. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Before we go, Brendon, where can people connect with you if you told us where to find your documentary, but where people learn more from you and connect with you if they have questions or if they wanted to share their own story?
I am at BD Marotta, my first two initials and my last name, on most social media. I will say the big focus for me right now is AI because
Okay.
I know that's going to be important in the future. And the next film project I'm looking at doing might integrate a lot of AI visual effects. So you might see me posting about that a lot more than this issue, but I will take questions on this. You gave a very, let's just say, I think you took a more feminine approach to
Okay.
helping people along with a challenging discussion. I would take the opposite approach, which is if there is anyone who wasn't upset by anything I said and you feel left out, come find me on social media. I'll make sure to say something that upsets you and answer
Okay.
whatever question that you had that you thought you say, well, I was really expecting you to shock and offend me around this. And I felt like everything you said was just very rational and made sense, just bring it up with me on social media. I'm sure I can find something to upset you there.
I love that. Thank you so much, Brendon, for being here. All right, you guys, I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Brendon on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.